we have two new cases from Montech. This is the HS01 Pro in black, and this is the HS02 in white. The difference? Airflow and glass. The basic HS01 and HS02 come without any fans, and for either £20 or $30 extra, you get 5 120mm fans in the Pro versions. And today we're doing a review of the HS01 Pro. At first glance, the Montech HS01 Pro looks quite conventional. Let me pull off some panels and demonstrate that all is not quite as it appears. The top panel, magnetically retained, comes away nice and easily. The glass main panel, pop pins, similarly. Front panel, also. And now the back panel, right hand panel. Nice, easy, tool-free dismantling, and we can see, well, not a huge amount on this side. We've obviously got cables going to the front panel I/O, but everything else is hidden out of sight behind these covers. But in the main compartment, you will note we have 3 fans in the floor of the case, 2 fans at the rear, where you might expect to have 1 fan at the rear, possibly a fan in the roof, and fans at the front. Floor intake, rear exhaust, well, that's unusual. You can install up to 3 120 fans or a 360 rad in the roof of the case, a 280 or 360 in the front, a 120 radiator or the 2 120 fans in the rear, and in the floor either the 3 120 fans or a 240 radiator. The user guide that comes with the case is not bad. It has reasonable diagrams and it has plenty of information. Unfortunately, it's not color coded as such. It's relying on grayscale tones. And then we get to this section here where they're talking about reversing the case, flipping the hardware from one side to the other. The manual here is not as clear as it might be, but thankfully we have a reviewer's guide from Montech, and the reviewer's guide is absolutely excellent. So let's work through the reviewer's guide and check out the features of the HS01 Pro. Step 1 is to choose our layout. Let's dig into flipping over the case. Step 1 is to put it upside down. I'm going to make life easy and lay it horizontal. Off with some screws. That's a magnet, so it's 2 screws per foot and a bit of a pull because of the magnet. That's the 4 feet, and off with the dust filter. Might be interesting to show you the underside of the case, which is about to become the top of the case, because we have all this cabling in this channel. So the fans in a rack. These are reverse flow fans, by the way, in case that's not obvious. You can see the fan hub there, but intake like so because they're reverse blades. Okay, off with the feet. That took longer than I expected. And then we put the feet on the top. No screws needed because I've got magnets. Just leave them in place. It doesn't say to remove the screws. And then we position the dust filter, and then I guess we put it like so. And there we go. So we have the mesh front panel, we have our fans are now in the roof of the case, and we have fans exhausting to the rear, and the hardware's there. Once you understand how to remove the feet and reposition them, it's easy. Installation of the power supply. We need to go around the back. So we have a couple of covers in the way. This cover covers the PWM Fan Hub. That out of the way. And this is a drive plate. Each of the drive mounts can accommodate one 3.5-inch drive or two 2.5-inch drives. So that's two 3.5s or four 2.5s or one 3.5 and two 2.5s. Power supply installation. Let's take this Montech HS02 1050 watt gold power supply. It's modular and you can see I have no cables installed, and it essentially goes, well, actually the other way around, like that. So the intake is outboard and it's on that bracket, but to install it correctly we need access to the screw holes, and you will note we have a pass-through cable which will go, it's going to go through there, all like that, connect to the power supply. To actually install the power supply, to secure it, we need to remove this bracket. And to do that, we remove these four screws. One of which is now under a magnetic foot. So we install the power supply on the bracket, put the four mounting screws in place, and then we put the assembly back in and we rescrew it. Slightly cumbersome way of going about things. There is, however, a neat little feature here. So that is the ATX power supply installation. There's an alternative route. Instead of using an ATX power supply, you can switch to SFX. Physically much smaller and still rated very highly. So what you do is you take your bracket and you rotate it 90 degrees. You install your power supply on this bracket and now you reinstall it in the case. But now the four screws that previously went through from the floor to hold the bracket in place, instead you secure the screws through that mesh panel there. So we're not going to go with SFX because that's a Seasonic, and we're sticking with Montech hardware for this review, and we have an ATX Montech power supply. So let's install the Montech power supply in the bracket and then put it back in the case. Just like that. And I'm going to say, if you have a switched power supply, that is a good time to switch it to avoid future grief. The case is flipped, the power supply is installed.
With 20 years of PC manufacturing experience, CyberPower PC are the best in the business. With the largest range of parts available in the UK, our team of experienced builders will expertly build and test each system to be delivered to you the very next day. Check out cyberpowersystem.co.uk.
The motherboard. Our motherboard is this MSI MPG X870E Carbon Wi-Fi. Processor is a Ryzen 9 9950X 3D. We have a crucial T700 Gen 5 SSD. Let's just snap on the heatsink. And for memory, we have 32 gigabytes of G.Skill Trident Z5 Royal Neo DDR5 8000. So we remember that we've inverted the case, which means that the rear I/O goes here. We take our motherboard, we offer it up, and it doesn't fit. And the issue is this cover, which is indeed covered in the user guide and indeed the reviewer's guide. The point here is that this case supports up to ATX motherboards but not eATX, but it's all about hiding away the cables because it also supports the BTF form factor. If I take this Micro ATX MSI B650M Gaming Plus motherboard and I offer it up, you can see it fits absolutely beautifully. So I need to remove that cosmetic cover and then I can install my ATX motherboard, which looks like that. And then we can install our graphics card. We have here an MSI Ventus 3X 24GB RTX 4090, and we can plug it in And it looks like that. But you might not want your upside down graphics card to be horizontal. You might want to use a PCI Express riser to put the graphics card vertically, which will put it in this position here. And how do you go about doing that? Montech's got you covered. You can rotate the rear PCI Express expansion slot bracket. Rotating the bracket's straightforward enough, but it required a bit of pressure to reinstall the second of the two mounting screws, and now we can put our graphics card upside down. But how do we install the screws that hold the graphics card in place? The rear fans are in the way. Happily, Montech has you covered. You can remove the rear fan bracket to gain access. Remove two tiny screws from what is now the underside of the case. If the case wasn't inverted, they'd be at the top. And you can remove that rear fan assembly. And now you've got access to the securing screws for the graphics card. Put the fans back in place. Cables are a bit fiddly. Reinstall the two tiny screws. And there we have it. Inverted case, ATX motherboard, vertical graphics card. Not sure I see any particular reason to keep it like that. I think I'm going to put the graphics card back in the horizontal position because we're already doing something out of the ordinary by inverting the case. What else while we're here? Front fans. We have this front fan rack. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to install an air cooler on my processor. I want the front open for maximum airflow behind that mesh panel. Out with that bracket. A few cable ties and a bit of cable management later, and the PC's pretty much finished. Before we put the panels back on the case, we need to install the CPU cooler, but we're making good progress. And the cooler we've chosen is a Montech Metal DT24 Premium. It's a twin tower cooler with a pair of 120mm fans, which can handle up to 270 watts of TDP. And it looks completely at home inside this HS01 Pro. Before I put the panels back on the case and do some thermal testing, it occurs to me I've mentioned the PWM Fan Hub, but I haven't shown the hub to you, so let me do that. Now, bearing in mind the case is inverted, so the top is the bottom, bottom's the top, the hub's in there, and you can connect 6 ARGB and PWM fans. Obviously many fans will have one connection for ARGB and one connection for PWM, so 6 fans. You get 5 in the case, so in essence the hub handles the fans in the case. With the Montech cooler, which is dual fan, it has a Y cable, so you can connect the 2 fans together and connect them to a single connection point on your motherboard, or indeed to that PWM fan hub. I've actually gone direct to the motherboard for each of the fans, so I can control the fans in the BIOS when I'm doing thermal testing, so I know exactly what's going on with each of the fans. But I could have connected the 5 fans in the case and the 2 fans on the cooler together, and then to the hub, and then the hub would connect to one single header on the motherboard. The other thing I haven't mentioned is the front I/O panel, which is there, but of course it would ordinarily be there. We have power button. That is an ARGB control button to switch either from manual control of the RGB lighting or to the ARGB header once you hook into the motherboard, which is what I've done. We have symmetrical USB-A's, a single USB-C, and we have audio jacks either side of the power button. So the connectivity is absolutely fine. Whether you want it at the top or the bottom doesn't really make a lot of difference in the great scheme of things. Okay, let's put the panels on and then we can get on with thermal testing. Installing the panels with the case inverted is actually slightly more tricky than it might first appear, because you have to hook the tabs into the top and then hinge the bottom in rather than the other way around. But once you get your brain around that, it's easy peasy. The glass is reflecting the lighting, so I've removed it just for the moment. I'll install it in a second for thermal testing. Right now, however, I'm saying the HS01 Pro looks really smart. With the PC running and using a suitable RGB lighting pattern, we could use a combination of Cinebench R23 and Speedway stress test to put a load on the PC. The RTX 4090 graphics card pulls 420 watts under load, and the Ryzen 9 9950X 3D processor pulls 200 watts. Total system draw 760 watts. For our first test, all the fans were running at 1000 RPM and the system sounded like this. At an ambient of 20 degrees, the graphics are running at 68 degrees, the processor at 92 degrees. For the second test, we increased the fan speed to 1200 RPM and it sounded like this. The ambient had crept up to 21 degrees, the graphics temperature was 67, so effectively it dropped 1 degree, and the CPU was 92 degrees, and also had effectively dropped 1 degree. For the third test, we increased the fans to 1500 RPM, and they sounded like this. Ambient was now 22 degrees, the graphics card was still 67, so again effectively dropping 1 degree, and the CPU 92 degrees, again effectively dropping 1 degree. For our fourth and final test, we ran the fans at 100%, CPU fans at 2000 RPM, and the case fans at 1600 RPM, and it sounded like this. The ambient was still 22 degrees, the graphics were still 67, the CPU temperature actually dropped a couple of degrees to 90 degrees. As I reach my conclusion about this Montech HS01 Pro, I want to reassure you I will be reviewing the HS02 Pro I showed you in the introduction, and I think I'll keep that in standard non-flipped conventional form, so you'll get the best of both worlds from those two reviews. Pros and cons about the HS01 Pro. Pros: you get 5 120mm ARGB fans as part of the Pro package, and that looks like very good value for money. Secondly, a 6-way PWM and ARGB hub is included. And third, this case supports BTF motherboards as well as conventional motherboards, and that means you can hide away all your messy cables. Cons, the negatives. The motherboard, PSU and graphics installation has been a bit of a fiddly process, as I showed you in the video. Secondly, reinstalling certain parts, in particular rotating and then reinstalling the PCI Express expansion bracket, required a certain amount of force to get the screws back in place. Thirdly, you're limited to an ATX motherboard once you remove the part I showed you, and there's no support for eATX. And finally, as you can see, it's a large case with plenty of space to fill. With this quite chunky air cooler, it actually looks rather empty, and as you can see, the graphics card's a big boy. So you're going to have to come up with some hardware to fill the space. Overall, I'm giving this case 7.5 out of 10 and a worth considering award. Remember to check us out on KitGuruTech, and we're also on TikTok.